Welcome back to Interconnected. I'm Dr. Pedram Shojai, and I'm excited to be back with you on this journey into the healing properties of the microbiome. We've learned so much about the interaction of our bodies with bacteria in our guts and how that leads to ill health if we're out of balance. This series is giving you the power to heal from within. Today, we're going to explore the interconnection with thyroid disease, obesity, and diabetes, three major issues that are overrunning the current healthcare system. When I was in school, we learned about Hashimoto's thyroiditis, but never really saw much of it. And now today, it's seemingly everywhere. So what's different? Could what we've learned about the leaky gut and poor microbial balance be what's causing this big uptick in this autoimmune disease? It turns out there's far more to thyroid issues than the current model addresses. Let's get into it.
When I was first diagnosed with Hashimoto's, an autoimmune thyroid condition, I was a pharmacist, right? So I thought, okay, great, there's a medication I could take for this condition. And medications can be extremely helpful for people because they can help stabilize the condition. And if you're deficient in a hormone, a medication is going to be the quickest way to get you that hormone. And it could be life-changing. You could feel significantly better in a short amount of time. However, I also wanted to know what was causing me to have that condition. That's really how I got interested in root cause medicine.
So what is a thyroid gland? What does it do?
The thyroid gland is a tiny butter-shaped gland that sits at the base of our neck, and it has a very important job of regulating our metabolism. So this means it helps to run our body, runs our temperature, helps us extract nutrients from food, and basically makes sure that we have energy and that we're burning down our fat. A lot of times we'll see people who struggle with an underactive thyroid, very much they're going to have trouble with their energy levels. They may be gaining weight, and their metabolism is going to be slowed down, so they're going to have slower cell turnover, which will result in dry skin, potentially losing hair, and even various types of things that we may not connect, such as libido problems.
If someone has, for example, Hashimoto's, which I see a lot of in my practice, that's my probably number one specialty, is how many people have Hashimoto's and they don't even know it, which they may have had for 20 years and it was never tested. And even if it was tested, they may have not even been told, which is often the case too, is that's been there because there's no treatment for it. You just wait for the immune system to attack your thyroid as much as possible until we can replace the thyroid.
So if it's your thyroid becomes less functional. When the thyroid becomes less functional, continuing with more antibodies, eventually you start getting some symptoms of a thyroid that's not working up to par. When you start getting symptoms of a thyroid not working up to par, it's years before you go to the right doctor and get the right diagnosis. The average is 3.5 years and 5 doctors before you get the right diagnosis of an autoimmune disease. Now, it's 3.5 years after the symptoms began enough that you need to go see a doctor. And they don't figure it out. Then you go to another doctor and another doctor.
In 2008, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's disease, which is an autoimmune disease that the immune system attacks the thyroid, and the result of that is the thyroid starts failing. That was a pivotal moment, and I was living in Shanghai in China at that time. That felt very disempowering because I didn't really there was no access to functional doctors. There were no books and resources back then about how do you deal with autoimmunity, right? A big part of my problem was obviously my gut health was a mess, and I had no idea. I wasn't connecting the dots. I wasn't in the health space at that point yet. So that was a real wake-up moment, just to realize that my own immune system is killing my own body, and there's something I have to be able to do about it. Yet there were no resources back then, and so that's what got me on the path of research and investigation of just what is it I can do for myself to reverse this and stop it.
There is no understanding of why is my immune system attacking itself in this location versus that organ. So often the treatments I use is based on really, really, really proper assessment.
If you have elevated antibodies, we know with what degree of accuracy you're going to get the disease. For example, if you have elevated TPO antibodies, that's your thyroid, especially postpartum, it's 92% positive predictive value. You're getting Hashimoto's thyroid disease within 7 years.
A lot of my assessment is using advanced testing, but really it's in a really good case taking. So taking 90 minutes to really look at someone from preconception until where they are today. So I go all the way back to before they were born and really, really take a thorough history. Often the things that went off first, so that could have been that they had heartburn at age 12, or that they had ulcers at 5, or that they started getting constipated or had diarrhea at age 7, and they're 50. But that's still important. Why was it that that happened back then? What was the first system to go off and why? Sometimes that's very crucial in looking at the now. You know, often we don't care about what's happened in the past is done, but it can give you clues.
I work with a number of women with Hashimoto's, and we've seen their antibodies up in the thousands and can get them down to about 100. With that, you're working with diet, you're working with the gut microbiome, you're working with food sensitivities. I find those to be the most common triggers for Hashimoto's. You could potentially be looking at heavy metals as well, but just also understanding that you can reverse Hashimoto's. We're often told that you can't, but I continually see these antibody levels come down when the body is looked at. Also a mind piece. What's going on that's causing that thyroid issue? Most of the time, Hashimoto's goes hand in hand with hypothyroidism as well. So then you look, well, why do you end up with hypothyroidism? Because there's an adrenal aspect. What is going on in your life that's causing all of that?
Most people aren't aware that most cases of thyroid disease are actually autoimmune in nature. People are told that they have a sluggish thyroid, an underactive thyroid, that they're hypothyroid, or that they need thyroid hormones. What they don't often know is that 97% of cases of an underactive thyroid are caused by an autoimmune condition known as Hashimoto's. This is a condition that leads to the immune system attacking our thyroid gland, and eventually the thyroid gland is not able to make enough thyroid hormone, which then results in an underactive thyroid or hypothyroidism.
Every autoimmune disease, we now know, has elevated antibodies years before they ever have a symptom. Years. This prodromal period. And so we now know what's called the positive predictive value, the PPV. That's why if you do a blood test, there's a normal reference range on the laboratory report for thyroid antibodies or myelin antibodies or bone antibodies. There's a normal amount of them. But when you have elevated antibodies, you're killing off more cells than you're making. When you're killing off more cells than you're making, the tissue becomes less functional.
I was diagnosed with thyroid disease after almost 10 years of really strange symptoms. So I had chronic fatigue, I had irritable bowel syndrome, I had panic attacks, acid reflux, carpal tunnel syndrome, hair loss, weight gain, weight loss, you name it, I had it. I had just about every single symptom in the book. And I didn't really know that there was anything I could do about it. First of all, I didn't get the right kind of tests. And eventually, when I even did get the right kind of tests, I was just told that I could take a medication. As a pharmacist, I was more than happy to take any medication that anybody would give me, right? But at the same time, the medications didn't help me feel significantly better. They helped a little bit. I went from sleeping for 12 hours to 11 hours, and from wearing 2 jackets in Southern California to actually being able to just wear 1 jacket.
Well, I had Hashimoto's disease together with estrogen dominance, most likely adrenal fatigue. So I had a whole host of different symptoms going on, anything starting from a lot of digestive issues all the time, right? Eating something and feeling like I was 4 months pregnant, like within half an hour, to horrendous fatigue, which was most likely driven through because of the thyroid. Having anxiety. I started getting anxiety attacks, which was a real phenomenon because I had never ever experienced anxiety before. And suddenly the smallest thing is an email from a client or a phone call that was unsatisfactory would just trigger me, just put me like in the space of complete irrational fears and bodily reactions that came along with that. Horrendous fatigue. I would wake up in the morning not being able to function without having at least 2 to 3 cups of coffee or more like espresso to really get me going.
I was still struggling a lot in my day-to-day life. I felt like I couldn't get anything done that I wanted to do. I was very ambitious, yet all I could do after work is come home and sit on the couch and watch a little TV and maybe pass out. And I really didn't feel like I was living my best life. I withdrew from people. I withdrew from my dreams. I really withdrew from life because of this condition. I got the diagnosis and I got the medications, and I thought this was going to be a great way to turn things around, and maybe I would feel better. Maybe I would feel like myself again. Yet I didn't really feel that much better. So I wanted to figure out if there was anything I could do to get myself well again.
I was beginning to feel like I was changing as a person, so much so that I became someone I had never known before. You know, you kind of know yourself, right? How you respond to problems or your energy levels. And suddenly within that year of living in Shanghai, I felt like I had become a different person. I became bitter, angry, very impatient, anxious, tired all the time, and that was manifesting in the way I was interacting with people and my team, and I was working in that back then, leading a big team. So that was really scary, to become a different person. The disease can change you. You change your personality.
And most of us are in a complete state of overwhelm. We have a to-do list that goes from this and this and this and this. And so we often feel like we don't have time to pause. For the nurturer archetype, it feels really selfish. For the Wonder Woman, it's like, I can't possibly pause. I have so much going on. And it's like, step back. You actually do. And actually, as much as we don't want to hear it, we're not that as important as we think that we are, right? We need to take time for ourselves. If we're doing everything for everybody, whether it's family or work, then we're not learning that they can't get resilient. They're not as resilient as what they should be. Right? So you take care of yourself first. It's not selfish. It's absolutely needed. If you don't start to work on it, things progressively get worse. By the same token, if you start to work on it, things start to get better. And to get to this point where you feel emotionally, physically, and intellectually resilient, and everything starts to flow for you in life. That won't happen without a shift in mindset. And that is for you to take the priority, that your health has got to take priority.
There were things that really made a difference, such as changing up my diet. There were supplements that I took because I was nutritionally deficient. There were changes that I made to my microbiome. I utilized a lot of different probiotics and a lot of different protocols to really get things into balance. And it's been life-changing to have my brain back. It's been life-changing to be able to move, to go to yoga class, to not sleep for 12 hours each day.
The cure from Hashimoto's and reversing estrogen dominance, healing my gut was a few-year process, that's for sure. And the biggest thing I think was doing the elimination diet, getting rid of all the highly inflammatory foods, which today we very well know, things like gluten, dairy, corn, soy. In my case, also caffeine was a big driver for my antibodies and the inflammation that was causing the immune system to respond. So getting rid of all of those, changing the environment, diet is a big thing. I mean, I think a diet is so fundamental to what we do. But then also looking at other factors, stress levels, quitting my job in advertising from a regional job where I was on the road all the time. Every week I was in a different city in Asia. Living, off hotel foods and living at airports, giving that up and just stepping down and simplifying my life in so many ways.
When I was in my 20s and I was a newlywed, I found out that I had Hashimoto's, and this was really devastating for me. It was a huge blow, and I knew that people with thyroid conditions were more likely to have fertility issues. And on top of that, I then learned that I had premature ovarian failure, which I sort of gave up on having kids, and I thought, I don't like kids. I don't want them anyway. And it was really hard because I'd always wanted to be a mother, and I always wanted to have children and felt like that was a big dream of mine. And in my 20s, as a newlywed, just to have that taken away from me, that was quite devastating.
Detoxification played a huge role, doing a lot of liver detoxification, gut detoxification, parasite cleansing, which, having lived in Asia, I picked up a lot of those. So all of those combined has resulted in, it was probably about like a 7-year journey. It came to a point where my Hashimoto's antibodies are now below 60. So I'm still testing slightly positive, but technically, I'm in remission from Hashimoto's. And most importantly to me is the fact that I'm completely not symptomatic and I feel amazing. You know, my hair is great again. I'm full of energy. I do not have weight issues. Anxiety is all gone. I do not have the fatigue that I ever had. I don't have to rely on caffeine to bring my energy up. And I'm a completely different person the same way I was when I was 25. How has it changed in one way? You know, I can't even describe it. I mean, everything from quitting my job to having a new life and working as a health practitioner and helping women rebalance their hormones with food, which is my absolute passion. You know, I could have never done that if I stayed in advertising.
I actually came home and I cried. I cried for pretty much a whole day, and my husband didn't quite know what to say to me. He didn't know what to do. He's trying to comfort me, and you know, I couldn't even be comforted at that point because it was something that you feel like is your human right, part of nature, part of our legacy that you can't even carry on because of your health.
I don't think we can fully live our lives with a disease. It always feels like something is empty there. There's always something that it's a very draining energy that it needs to be put in managing a disease rather than living your life and growing as a person in every way, growing in a relationship.
When we start shifting the things that we put into our bodies, we can really shift out our output. I just had a baby boy who's 10 weeks old today, and I didn't think I'd ever be able to be a mother. I had a diagnosis of Hashimoto's and premature ovarian failure in my 20s. And so this is something that's possible for a lot of people. I don't want people to give up on their hopes and dreams and on their health. Know that there are solutions. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard, but you are worth it. Maybe not eating that pizza might seem like it's hard right now, but in the long term, when you get your health back, it's going to be worth it. So to turn that all around has just been completely joyous and ecstatic and sometimes surreal. I look at my baby and I say, really, this little special person, this little human that I love so much, he's mine. I can't believe this happened, and it's been a long journey. I'm very, very happy of how it turned out.
I would say if somebody has been diagnosed right now with a condition, do not wait till it manifests. Your body is sending you very subtle but clear signals very early in the game. You're tired, you've got digestive issues, you have pain when you have had a meal after having some dairy, you feel bloated, you got a headache after having that piece of cake. Those are your body's way of telling you that's not okay. For me, the microbiome is my boss, that I really gotta listen and respect and honor in every way.
Healing Hashimoto's is connected to healing the gut. Eating the right foods and lowering your stress can bring you back to health in short order. The more we learn about the microbiome, the more we find how truly interconnected everything is. We need to create peace at the gut barrier so we stop triggering autoimmune reactions. There's no pill for that, but there's a whole lot more promise than a life of pill popping. Here are some of the common symptoms of Hashimoto's. Chronic fatigue, irritable bowel syndrome, panic attacks, acid reflux, hair loss, and weight gains. These are some of the common ones. Some of the common triggers include food sensitivities and heavy metals. And common treatments include an elimination diet which pulls high sensitivity foods out of your diet for a few weeks, and also detoxification. This is a big subject in itself, and we have an entire segment on this in the series. The basic types would be liver detoxification, gut detoxification, and parasite cleansing. I really hope you're enjoying these amazing insights into how our thyroids are interconnected with our microbiome. That's why I want to remind you that you could own the complete interconnected documentary series at home. Click on the link below this video and you get all the details on how you can access the episodes, the bonuses, and the Living Probiotically companion guide that's going to help you put lots of this information to work, upgrading your health. You also get invited to 2 live Q&A sessions where you can ask questions of the experts that I bring on for those events. Guaranteed, interconnected, and the experts we talk to are going to change the course of medicine as we speak. So click the link below and check out our limited time discount offer. It's only available while these episodes are live. And you come back in a few days, it's gone, it's too late. So click the link below and find out how you can get access to this groundbreaking series for life. Grab your copy of Interconnected and discover how to rebalance your thyroid and so much more. One of the most interesting and compelling findings in all the microbiome research is its link to obesity. In the lab, we found a clear connection between certain bacteria and obesity. Scientists are racing to understand this in humans because we're a bit more complicated, but the writing is on the wall. Certain bacteria are linked to obesity, and other species are found only in thin or healthy mammals. This is huge because it means we may have found the missing link to why weight loss has been so tough. It's in the microbiome.
The microbiome is a new way for us to look into what's going on behind the scenes that may be basically blocking their ability to lose weight. So when we look at the microbiome, there are specific patterns that we often see in these cases. And we see a typical sort of imbalance of microbes, and we also see lower diversity. There's also this concept that's out in research and has been validated to some extent that has to do with the Firmicutes to Bacteroidetes ratio. So those are 2 main groups that make up the microbiome. And when they're out of balance, that changes the ratio. And that's been linked to obesity. So when we look in detail, there are specific subgroups of bacteria within those larger groups that we see that are out of balance.
There's been a few really impressive case studies that have walked in the door. One we published on our website now, probably about 2 years ago. Her name was Jen, and she was the perfect patient. She was actually referred in from another doctor in town who was intimidated because he said she's too smart. She knows everything, right? She was reading all the blogs, listening to all the podcasts. She was low carb, paleo, doing intermittent fasting, had a great exercise program, had her lifestyle dialed in, sleep dialed in, everything looked great, but she was still gaining weight and couldn't figure out why. And we found with Jen a fungal overgrowth, and it was a bit resistant. We had to treat it a couple times to get rid of it, but in doing that, she was able, over the course of a year, and without changing anything else, lose about 60 pounds and keep it off. Now that's an unusually strong response. I don't want to paint improving someone's gut health like this weight panacea, but for some people that can be the underlying factor that's been missed. For the fungal overgrowth, we just used a cocktail of herbal medicines like oregano and another formula that has about 6 different ingredients in it that we often use in the clinic, but just a mixture of different herbs that are all antifungal and antibacterial in nature.
Yeah, when I was about 22 years old, my body suddenly had this massive crash. I had no idea what was going on. I started swelling was the first symptom. So my legs started swelling. I started putting on some weight where I hadn't, put on weight otherwise. I was eating the same, exercising the same, and my body was basically blowing up. Eventually, I suffered from migraines, fatigue, insomnia, you name it. I probably experienced it. I, of course, took myself to traditional medicine to see what was going on in my body. At this time, I was now like 50 plus pounds overweight in a matter of a couple months and just really feeling unlike myself.
I work with a lot of clients who are overweight, and in a lot of these cases, they've been to other practitioners in order to help them lose weight, and they basically haven't been able to make much progress.
When I got to my traditional medical doctor back in my hometown, they of course ran a bunch of labs, said everything looks pretty much normal. There were a few abnormals, but they didn't do anything about it. And they told me basically stop eating salt. That's the one thing that they recommended me to do. I obviously didn't want that as an answer, so I sought out other help through traditional medicine still. I saw an immunologist, an endocrinologist, an allergist, a gynecologist, all the different things, because what was happening is each doctor was unsure what was going on with my body, and they would just refer me to the next doctor and the next specialist and the next specialist. When in reality, what was happening was so deep inside my body that it really took somebody trained in functional medicine to understand that this goes beyond just a typical lab value data that we can assess.
So we start to see specific patterns that we can recognize, and then we know from further research and clinical experience what we potentially can do to affect that balance.
So finally, after a lot of trial and error from a traditional medical model standpoint, I went to functional medicine practitioners who got specialty testing for my gut function, food intolerance, nutrient balance, and also heavy metals. And that was really key to understanding, oh yeah, there really is something going on inside of my body. It's not just in my head. Obviously, I know I'm experiencing these symptoms. You can tell physically my body is changing and is inflamed. And so specifically when I had a stool test done, as well as a food intolerance test, I was able to combine those two and start to go step by step to heal.
When we basically address these imbalances, then oftentimes we can be very successful in starting to get the weight loss to be more effective in those cases.
I was eating lots of vegetables, lean meats, but what I didn't know is that I was actually cutting out entire food groups, which was contributing to a major imbalance in my body. So I was eating the same things every day, which was leading to a gut microbiome that was not diverse, so my immune function was not strong. I was cutting out all grains, I was cutting out all fats, and basically just eating a very strict diet without really even knowing I was doing so, because it's what I had been told basically in the media.
For anyone who's been struggling with weight loss for many years, I would highly recommend looking into getting your microbiome tested, because that can yield some really great insights into what might be going on, especially if you've been struggling with trying various approaches and they just haven't worked for you.
So in this healing journey, I found out that, well, I'm basically deficient in most all nutrients, and it's because I've been eating the same foods all day, every day, cutting out major food groups. So in healing my gut, I really had to pay attention with, getting different items at the grocery store that I didn't get the week before, and just kind of changing up my routine so that I'm getting all the nutrients I need. It also took adding healthy fats back into my diet, which was huge. For years, I had believed that fats were bad. Fats were going to make me fat. But in fact, it was the opposite. Fats reduce inflammation, and they really helped me heal my intestinal problems and ultimately my entire body.
We can tell an awful lot from the microbiome and the types of imbalances that are present in a given individual, because what may be preventing you from losing weight compared to another person may be a little bit different. So you're going to need a very specific approach in terms of how we would help you lose weight based on that information that we get from the microbiome.
Through my own healing journey, of course, all the ups and downs, I now feel obligated to spread the message that there is definitely something going on in your body if you are having these symptoms and your lab results may be normal, or you've tried all these diets and nothing is working. I have found that there is a better way out there to really heal chronic conditions, and it does stem from the gut many times. So as a functional medicine nurse practitioner myself now, I lead clients to completely rebalance their body head to toe, looking at the full systems, the full microbiome and your food intolerance and all those things that are going to add up to creating an environment in which your body is able to thrive.
Over time, I've seen a number of different cases where when we do apply this information that we're getting from the microbiome, we can be much more effective at helping them reach their goals in terms of weight loss. So I find this information extremely valuable because it really gives us some in-depth insight into what's going on in that particular individual.
Every single year, now that my body is rebalanced, to make sure I stay that way, I get multiple tests done. I have a food intolerance test, a nutrient panel, heavy metal toxicity test, as well as a stool exam.
That gives us much more to work with in terms of how to adjust their diet, how to adjust their lifestyle for that particular case. And we see this time and time again, so I highly encourage everybody to go out and get your microbiome tested, because that potentially can reveal some new information that then can be acted on, that may give you a lot of hope that it's something that can be addressed to help you improve your health extensively.
I'm seeing a ton of people who do great on keto, and I'm seeing a ton of people who do terrible on keto, and I'm seeing a ton of people who do great on AIP paleo, and I'm seeing a ton of people who don't do great. So you have to determine what's going to work for you, not the blogosphere.
That's really clear that there is no one diet that's right for everyone, and there is no one diet that's right for everyone at every point in their life. Depending on where you are in your life, what the diet that you need that's going to be best for you is going to change. And so we can talk about a general diet that, might be best for a lot of people. That's great, but if you start to break it down, you can look at a specific food. There is no one food that's going to be beneficial for everyone. So, the same food can be great for one person, can have no effect on another person, and actually be harmful for a third person. And one of the biggest determinants of what effect a food is going to have on a person is our microbiome. Because we all have such unique microbiomes, we all need very unique foods to optimize our health. Everyone wants the answer, right, handed to them, and we've been through so many different diet trends over the years. If you look at the cover of Time magazine over the years, it's everyone should eat low fat. Oh, no, high fat's good. No, paleo's good. Ketogenic's the right thing to eat. And in a lot of situations, you have someone who writes a diet book and it worked for me, it's the best diet. Because it worked for me, everybody in the world should be on this diet. And that's clearly not the case. We all know examples of people who have tried a low-fat diet and have felt great, and we know other people who have just felt terrible on a low-fat diet or a vegan diet. Same thing with the paleo diet. Some people have felt wonderful on it, other people really awful on it. And it's just very clear that there is no one diet that's going to be right for you all the time.
We know that caloric restriction is very, very difficult to do for people because people in general don't want to restrict their calories long term. That's not very feasible. You can get similar benefits from intermittent fasting. And that's relatively new research that shows that the types of effects on the microbiome from intermittent fasting mimics what we see with caloric restriction and potentially can also improve the profile in a way that's consistent with increased longevity and increased health span.
You can think of it from a population perspective. If you think of the Eskimo or the Inuit population, their diet pretty much consists of blubber and protein, and they're really healthy. There's no chronic disease in their population. You can think of another tribe in Africa, the Bantu tribe, that are pretty much vegan. Again, very little chronic disease. Now, if you switch those two populations and switch their diets, you now introduce chronic disease. And they don't do very well with those different diets. So clearly, it does depend on the individual population, and that's very much so in terms of genetics, but clearly those populations have unique microbiomes as well. So if you really want to empower yourself, it's all about the democratization of medicine, right? Really putting the power back into the patient or the consumer's hands so they can do what's right for them. And what's right for them is not going to be what's right for their neighbor or their friend. And so how does one actually navigate through this crazy milieu of all of this conflicting advice is you now have the ability to do certain tests to try to determine what's going to work for you and what you need at this point in time.
Obesity and weight issues that I see commonly, it's not necessarily what they're eating and exercising that's actually contributing to their health problems. It's often what they have been eating. And so often what we find it's the sugar content, for example, that they had high in their diet, or the corn syrup, or the sugars which they didn't think were bad that were hidden in their foods, which, for example, fructose, and the corn syrups that we find now. That's what affected the microbiome and changed the diversity and affected their gut flora, which then changed their brain, their liver function. I mean, it can go everything from there, from just what they ate, consciously knowing that it was bad, or actually even not consciously knowing.
There are emotional reasons why you eat food, but there are also physical reasons, and one of those is the overgrowth of candida. Candida loves sugar. It thrives on sugar. And so if you find yourself in the kitchen at 10 p.m. eating cacao truffles, that was me. When I had an overgrowth of candida, it felt like a visceral response and I couldn't stop it. So if that is you, it's highly likely to be physical, not necessarily emotional. Like there are ways to understand the gut microbiome. We have testing available that can see if there is the overgrowth of candida or parasites or bacteria, but we can identify that today.
When we look at the individual microbiome, it really does give us something that we can zero in on that we just haven't had before to work with. And their symptoms, and especially in terms of their gut health, can be greatly improved.
A lot of these things that are banned now, trans fats, this sugar, that sugar, they're so hidden in different words and names. And it's just amazing how much sugar can actually change the microbiome and affect it negatively. So I would say if there's one thing I ask my patients to do that have obesity issues, or if I can help them with that, is really look at the sugar in their diet and the hidden sugars, the healthy sugars. There's the sugars that, that brand bar, that cereal, the Fruit Loops that claims, to be healthy and full of fiber and full of protein, but it has sugars that actually are a disadvantage for the bacteria in the gut. So I think the obesity here is not necessarily, exercise does also affect the microbiome. So what you eat and how much you move does, but it also depends on, again, like I said, what your mom ate, what you ate as a child that's led to here. Sometimes I'll see a patient remove their gallbladder, or they had something drastic happen that can really change the microbiome, and that triggered the onset of weight gain, hormones change, menopause kicked in. But in a truly obese patient who's been obese for a while and really having a hard time with that, often it's the predispositions. It's almost like the terrain, the soil of that tree is bad, and you're trying to pick the leaves that are going bad and cut off the branch. But it's really, you got to go to the soil and see, okay, what is off right at the core? And often the core is the microbiome, is the gut, is the liver.
We know that the liver changes fat storage signaling when it's under attack. We know that it itself stores more fat. So if you can heal the gut and get rid of the endotoxemia, you can actually lower the fat signals in the human body, lower the inflammatory signals. You can turn off the fat cells. So no, you don't necessarily have a one-to-one correlation. If I eat carbs, I'll get fat. It doesn't exist. It's if you eat certain carbs in a certain environment, in a certain individual, you have to be cautious. Not too many of refined stuff, but if you have the fibrous carbs, perhaps less caution. You can eat a ton.
When we take out the stomach, we do gastric bypass, we actually take out the organ that is most crucial in living and giving us nutrients, which then puts more stress on the liver, and so it's just a bad downset to go.
First and foremost, I work with my clients on correcting their diet. We'll start to see this consistent weight loss drop. One reason for that is that the polyphenols and the fiber in the in the vegetables and the fruit and vegetables, it actually causes the proliferation of the good bacteria, which is supportive for that. Then you'll start to notice that it plateaus. Well, then they start to get bloated. Or they come in and they've been doing that and they're stuck. The first place that I go to is the gut microbiome, because there is a connection between the gut microbiome and a slowing in weight loss. So when the gut microbiome is out of balance, then what happens is it interferes with some of the enzymes that tell the body to burn body fat. And we know that in the cases of obesity, there's a slowing there. Also be aware, at 3 p.m. or 4 p.m., your brain needs a break. Like, it's okay to pause. That's often what you're looking for. If you're craving sugar, go towards a piece of fruit. If that doesn't satiate you, it's emotional here. Right? You just need a break. Pause, go out for a walk if you can, come back, regroup. If you're starting your day with gluten-free cereal, a cup of coffee, and then by the time 11 o'clock rolls around, you're super tired, it's because you've had a blood sugar drop. Then what happens is that you then go and get a sandwich because you're in a rush, it's the easiest thing to get. You have more carbohydrates, shoots up the glucose levels, the body then overshoots the insulin, you drop down, you're super tired again. By the time 3 o'clock rolls around, you want that cookie, bagel, or whatever is left over from the office meeting. You put that in, the blood sugar eventually drops, and you're on this continual roller coaster wondering why you're tired, why you're gaining weight, and why you're feeling depressed. That's very simple to change.
One of the things that I warn my patients about when I take away sugars, white flour, or suggest that they avoid them is the cravings that will happen. Cravings for these particular foods, despite having had a meal, the patient will go and look in the cupboard and try and find these foods. This is the voice of the microbiome. This is the bacteria that are looking for their food supply and triggering the brain.
What also happens is it affects the gut microbiome. When there's too many carbohydrates in the body, you start to shift the gut microbiome balance there. It moves into more of a pathogenic state. That then changes the inflammation in the body. Right? You can then end up with the overgrowth of candida, which is so common. Right? Then you've got rosacea coming up, you're craving the sugar, you're anxious. It's a whole roller coaster of things. You just pause.
Jenny was a patient of mine who needed to take off more than 50 pounds. She had the last 20 years of giving in to foods that she felt extremely guilty about and felt that it was a problem with herself. So her self-esteem comes into play, that she doesn't have the willpower to avoid these foods. Once she understood that it wasn't necessarily her voice that was driving her, she was able to take a stand and replace those nutrients with other beneficial nutrients that helped her to manage her cravings. Then, in the end, after 3 months' time, Jenny was able to balance her microbiome. She no longer has any cravings for these foods, and in fact, she embraces the nutritional foods, and those are the ones that feel good to her. When you have a success like that, the biggest fear is that you're going to go back again. Her mood is fabulous. She's taken her life back. It hasn't solved all of the problems in life, but it's given her hope. It's not our fault that we are in poor health. It is not our fault that we have gained weight, but it is our responsibility to take action and to look into balancing the microbiome in order to make a difference in our future.
There really is a paradigm shift of, there is no one right diet. There's, don't follow the celebrity diet. Don't follow the, what the latest trend is that it's a whole trend of personalization, the whole paradigm that even in medicine, we used to say one drug for everybody, right? Everybody with high blood pressure should all take this drug. We now know that that's not the case. That drug might work for one person, not another person. Same thing with diet. That diet's going to be great, or that food even is going to be great for one person, not another person. So we talk about personalized medicine, we talk about personalized diet. I think that's really the big shift, is that the recognition that we're all individuals, we're all extremely unique in every aspect. We're unique genetically, we grew up in a unique environment, we have unique microbiomes. There is nobody on this planet that is like you. You are an individual and you are unique. And so there's nothing that you need that's going to be the same as another person, because there's nobody like you.
Now we know there's so much more to weight loss than counting calories. Your microbiome has good and bad bacteria that play as much of a role in pounds that you carry as you're exercising and you're eating. If your hard work is not shedding the pounds, look to your microbiome. There's likely an imbalance there. And if you're craving sweets, that's also likely the bacteria or the yeast talking. Here's some key takeaways from this section. Obesity is linked to something known as our firmicutes to bacteroides ratio. It can be from fungal overgrowth like candida, and it's linked to overgrowth of other colonies that feed off of sugar and high fructose corn syrup. Also, endotoxemia, which is like an internal poisoning of the body from certain bacteria. We're also learning that cravings for some particular foods are driven by bad bacteria themselves. So perhaps it isn't just your willpower that's lacking, it's the bugs asking for the foods they like. Almost everyone in America knows somebody suffering from diabetes. It's said that up to 70% of hospital visits in America come from some complication of diabetes. And the cost in human suffering and financial burden is staggering. But there's hope. There's a silent revolution in our understanding of diabetes that you're about to learn. From the modulation of sugar, inflammation, and cravings to the protective benefits against toxins that may be causing the disease, there's a whole new world filled with hope. Let's explore.
When I see a patient with type 2 diabetes, I need to do some things in the short term that are going to help them, but then I also need to fix the insulin resistance so that long term I can start reintroducing some of those things that they can't have right at the start. And I'll give you an example. Okay, I had a 42-year-old patient recently. He was a fireman, okay, and he had type 2 diabetes, okay. And when I went into his history, there were multiple reasons why. He's a shift worker, okay, so his sleep patterns are off, okay. That's going to cause insulin resistance, okay. He doesn't move his body much, okay. He doesn't have much lean muscle mass. That's going to cause insulin resistance. His vitamin D levels are very low. That's going to contribute to insulin resistance, okay? His diet was full of highly processed and refined carbohydrates, okay? That's going to cause insulin resistance, okay? All these kind of things, okay? He had a bit of gut problem. He had a bit of bloating after certain meals, but a constipation. I knew he's got a gut microbiome imbalance, okay? I didn't measure it. I didn't feel the need to because I could just tell clinically that was what was going on.
Diabetes is a great disease for a dietitian because all is possible. Anything can happen. You can balance the blood sugars. When I see a patient with cancer, heart disease, anything, and the blood sugars are out of whack, we always go after the blood sugars because that is the fuel to the flame.
And then there are certain foods such as white rice and white potatoes that you can cook. And then in the process of allowing them to cool, they actually form a type of resistant starch. So if you're consuming essentially cold rice, such as in the form of sushi, for example, or cold potatoes, those can be good sources of resistant starches. Examples of resistant starches that are particularly effective in that application would be basically green bananas and plantains. And then there are also potato starches. So basically when you take raw potatoes, you can buy products that have powdered raw potato. That acts as a pretty significant resistant starch.
So in the short term, I dramatically cut out his refined carbs, his processed carbs, like your cereals, your highly processed breads, all these kind of things. And in the short term, I did actually also reduce some of that starchy veg, like sweet potatoes, which actually I think are very helpful, healthy food. But in the short term, I wanted to get on top of everything and get everything under control. And then what I do is I start to fix everything else.
We do have to manage a decrease in refined carbohydrates. That's what we do for any of the diseases that we've been discussing, is to decrease the refined carbohydrates, which are fueling the adverse bacteria.
When you make antibodies to a particular food, let's say milk, if you happen to be sensitive to milk, most doctors know that you never give cow's milk to a baby in the first year of life if there's a family history of type 1 diabetes. If the baby has the genes to be vulnerable to developing type 1 diabetes, you don't want antibodies that would go after the beta cells of the pancreas, that's the cells that make insulin, that's what causes the diabetes in babies and in children. If you don't want the antibodies going after the beta cells of the pancreas, which is what creates diabetes, you don't want antibodies to foods that have molecular mimicry with the beta cells of the pancreas. What foods have molecular mimicry with the beta cells of the pancreas? Milk. So if you have antibodies to cow's milk and you have a family history of type 1 diabetes, you are at much higher risk of developing the mechanism of type 1 diabetes. And you start killing off those cells, and it takes years of killing off those cells. Most children don't get diagnosed with type 1 diabetes until they're 8 or 9 or 10, because it takes years to kill off the beta cells enough to where they don't make insulin anymore. But it begins when they're drinking cow's milk, if they have that vulnerability.
In terms of addressing imbalances in particular types of conditions, such as type 2 diabetes, we have to look at the specifics of the imbalances in the microbiome. And typically what's known so far about these imbalances is that we have a lack of certain types of beneficial bacteria. In this case, these are the butyrate producers. And we also have an overgrowth or imbalance in the pro-inflammatory types, the types that will promote inflammation. And so typically what we're trying to do in this situation to restore balance is increase the butyrate producing bacteria. And the ways that we can do that is providing the types of fibers, et cetera, that they need to actually produce butyrate.
It's in fruits and vegetables. It's also in grains like oats, and I prefer oat groats, Groats, as a source because it can be savory or it can be sweet. And when I use sweeteners, we go for the raw honey because the bees put a substance into the honey that helps to prevent an overgrowth of bacteria. So that honey is in and itself a nutritional medicine. Oats, in combination with vegetables and other types of savory items, can be used in a variety of ways. If we put a little Italian dressing on those oats and some parsley and some tomatoes, some onions, we've got a tabbouleh without the wheat. I started to come across research that implicated soluble fiber as a primary fuel source of beneficial bacteria for the microbiome. So it's a very powerful tool. To have soluble fiber on a daily basis is essential for any person with diabetes. It's also helpful for weight management, and so the two come together. We can manage those blood sugars first by increasing sources of soluble fiber. Soluble fiber is different than insoluble fiber in that it swells and binds with blood fats, blood sugars, helps to carry them out of the body. So it can help with cholesterol, helps with blood sugars, helps with lab values.
In particular, inulin is a type of fiber that's been well established to stimulate butyrate production. Resistant starch is also another type of basically undigestible carbohydrate that we don't digest well, but the bacteria do, and they can promote or produce butyrate from that particular compound. Then there are particular types of probiotics that can be used to increase butyrate production. And there's some research around certain bifidobacteria species and strains, as well as certain lactobacillus species and strains that have been shown to stimulate the butyrate producers.
All these kind of things. I also gave him some probiotics, okay? Probiotics that I thought were going to help reduce the transfer of something called lipopolysaccharide, LPS. LPS is really important in type 2 diabetes. What we're finding now is that if you are giving low-grade insults to your body every day with poor lifestyle choices, you can get a leaky gut, and that LPS can start going into your bloodstream. That LPS itself will cause insulin resistance and cause type 2 diabetes. So I also gave him something to help reduce LPS transfer across his gut. And as I did that, his insulin resistance has started to come down, okay? And that means in 4 weeks' time, I can start to reintroduce foods like sweet potatoes, which a lot of people will say you can't have if you've got type 2 diabetes. I say, no, you can have it if you repair the underlying damage first.
So when you're using these types of things in a supplement protocol or making sure that they're getting adequate levels in the diet, that again can balance the microbiome in a way that reduces the signs and symptoms of something like type 2 diabetes. And we would see the effects, for example, in decreases in blood sugar, decreases in inflammation, and improvements in insulin sensitivity.
When someone comes in to see us and they have some symptoms, whether it's the symptoms of diabetes or a son with attention deficit or a woman with recurrent miscarriage, it doesn't matter what the symptoms are. It's like they have fallen over a waterfall and crashed into the pond below. They swim up to the surface. They get the water out. They say, oh, thank God I'm alive. And they're trying to stay afloat in this pond of diabetes or this pond of attention deficit. But the water's really turbulent because the waterfall keeps falling into the pond. They keep living the lifestyle that created the problem. Everyone's looking for the life jacket to stay afloat in the pond of their symptoms. And we want the life jacket with the least side effects possible. So you try the natural approaches first, but if they don't work, you take the drugs. Don't be foolish. Take the drugs for a short period of time so you can stay afloat in the pond of diabetes or in the pond of brain fog or the pond of recurrent miscarriages. You do what you have to do. But once you're secure, you don't stay in the pond. You don't stay in the environment that caused the problem. You have to swim over to the side of the pond, get out of the water, walk up the hill, go back upstream and figure out what fell in the water that carried me downstream and I fell over into the pond of diabetes or recurrent miscarriages or MS or rheumatoid. So that pharmaceutical approach is life jacket medicine. It's really important to have life jacket medicine, but it's not healthcare. It's life jacket medicine. Healthcare is figuring out what's it going to take to get me healthy. So you have to get out of the pond, walk up the hill, go back up the river, and explore where is it coming from. And a critical, perhaps the most critical component is the microbiome in the gut.
Diabetes has become one of the top chronic diseases, taking eyesight, limbs, and life. And thankfully, by rebalancing your microbiome, you can reduce, maybe even reverse this life-changing disease. We're learning a lot about bacterial strains that produce butyrate and other beneficial compounds. And we're also learning about certain harmful bacteria which can produce too many lipopolysaccharides, which transfer across the gut and cause insulin resistance. Here are some important takeaways to remember. We've learned that refined carbohydrates fuel adverse bacterial colonies and that lipopolysaccharides cause insulin resistance and may cause type 2 diabetes. We learned that diabetics have a lack of certain types of beneficial bacteria called butyrate producers, and that we can eat inulin and resistant starch to stimulate butyrate production. Here are some known butyrate producers: Clostridium butyricum, Eubacteriumi, Fusobacterium, Rosaburia, Fecalibacterium, and certain Bacteroides species. See how all of this is coming together? This information is too important to get lost in the shuffle of life, so take the opportunity right now and bring home so you could own this interconnected series with the DVDs at your leisure. You can watch. All you need to do is click the button below this video and check out how you can get the full series. You get it in video, you get it in audio and text form, plus you get a collection of exclusive bonus resources. The best part, for a very limited time, you can get the entire package at a massive 50% discount, but it's only during this live launch. You'll get lifetime access to everything you've seen in the episodes, plus the companion guides, the extended uncut interviews, and the How to Live Probiotically guide that'll help you put all of this into work in your life. But you can only do that at the massive discount during this live launch. Put the power of the microbiome in your own hands. Order Interconnected at home right now, risk-free. Let's get back to the episode. We are now in the throes of the main issues taking millions of lives in the West and are just beginning to understand the role of the friendly bacteria all around us in these diseases. What we've learned so far is that there's hope. A lot of it for a brighter future now that we're looking through the right lens. I'll see you in the next episode of Interconnected, where we're going to share how the microbiome is revolutionizing the treatment of cancer and heart disease, two of the worst diseases plaguing humanity. Until then, this is Dr. Pedram Shojai wishing you well.